continuing our reading from Saving Graces, Dark Ripples, Part 2. Chapter 2, Full Utility. It's nice to know that someone besides Greg is working for the same goal, after all. For most of the first week of the new year, Greg tries to figure out what Sherlock had been after in that kitchen. Unfortunately, there's only so far he can press a casual inquiry without giving away that he knows more than he should, and Sherlock answers each of his vague, open-ended questions with dismissive, distracted gestures and one-word replies. Never once does he even confirm that he's working on a private job. Usually he enjoys recounting the details of that very occasional work, either to impress Greg or as a reminder that he feels he's being underutilized on Greg's more important cases. It's frustrating, to be sure, but then Greg's lived with frustration for years, hasn't he? Sherlock Holmes seems an endless source of it, and all the more so in the 2 years since he came into Greg's life as more than an occasional vision. Greg does his best to keep to himself as much as possible for a few days, just in case the younger man gets into more trouble. It wouldn't do for Nadia or anyone else to witness him suddenly choking on nothing. His wife, especially, has spent years trying to force him into seeing a specialist. Every unlucky ripple at home marks the start of another round of their endless argument. The extra vigilance and the time spent finding excuses to see and carefully interrogate Sherlock is exhausting. By the time Sunday rolls around, Greg is very much looking forward to a day of solitary leisure. Nadia leaves him mid-morning to spend the day shopping with her mother and grandmother, and he fully intends to do nothing but lounge about and watch old films, preferably with a few bottles of his favorite lager on hand. But since the party, there's nothing left in the fridge but a few platters of leftover canapes. So he reluctantly changes out of the comfortable tracksuit bottoms he can't abide having seen in public, and bundles up in his overcoat for a brisk walk to the grocery. He doesn't make it there. Before he's turned the corner at the top of his street, he's already noticed the black car shadowing him. He slows deliberately, hoping it will pass, but no such luck. It creeps ominously alongside him, slower and slower, until Greg finally stops and turns, arms crossed, to scowl at its tinted windows. The rear door opens to a dim, shadowy interior, a disconcerting contrast to the bright, wintry sunlight, revealing nothing of the vehicle's passenger, but the voice that calls out to him from within is impossible to mistake and inadvisable to ignore. Mycroft Holmes. "Get in, if you please, Detective Inspector." Greg huffs a sigh and complies. What else can he do? As he slides in onto dark leather and pulls the door closed, he wastes no time on polite greetings. "What's going on now?" "You're being taken to attend a course today," answers Mycroft, all too happy to skip the small talk himself. "Excuse me?" "Call it continuing education, a useful supplement to your fine police training." The way Mycroft says it, fine, doesn't sound like a compliment. Greg looks at him suspiciously as his eyes adjust to the low light. Mycroft reads something on his phone and then puts it away with a prim flourish. The driver carries on towards a destination unknown. After a full minute of expectant silence, Greg clears his throat. "I'm waiting on an explanation, Mr. Holmes. I think I deserve one, being pulled away from my day off." "Days." "Excuse me?" "The course will take a week. You've been scheduled for paid holiday time, and will of course be issued a stipend for the week. Your suitcase has been packed with the essentials." "My case?" Greg gapes at Mycroft, then at the black, rolling suitcase Mycroft indicates with a sweep of one elegant hand, tucked neatly beneath the facing seats. "So you're sending me on a compulsory week's holiday with no warning? What about my wife?" "Mrs. Lestrade will be contacted by your chief inspector this evening and given a suitable explanation." "Suitable?" Greg repeats weakly. Now he's imagining Nadia grilling DCI Edwards for information and receiving crafted lies given on his behalf. It's in no way reassuring. "What kind of course? You still haven't said, he presses, trying to put that worry from his mind.
One thing at a time.
Mycroft makes a precise quarter turn in his seat, watching Greg's reaction to his every word with cool, careful eyes. As you know, neither the investigative branch of the Metropolitan Police nor the illustrious Traffic Division for which you were first trained are licensed to carry firearms. You, Inspector Lestrade, are about to become an exception. That reaction is nothing less than incredulous. You want me carrying a gun? Who says I want to? You'll do so neither continuously nor even frequently, fear not. Mycroft searches Greg's face, hesitating, then continues with a very slight nod. It's come to my attention that there have been various threats against my brother's life recently. He's apparently taken it upon himself to root out an Eastern European smuggling ring. Greg's ears perk up.
Straight face.
Oh, I thought he was acting a bit secretive about something this week. Granted, these Ukrainians will be simple enough to dissuade now that my people are involved. A matter of a few days at most. Still, it does serve to emphasize the fact that this sort of problem has become a repeated issue. Unfortunately, Sherlock remains utterly intractable in regards to allowing my personnel to shadow him for his own protection. And so you want me to be his bodyguard, Greg concludes, his face fixed into a rigidly controlled expression of solemnity. Inside, he's practically flailing with the unintentional irony. Under certain circumstances, at certain times. For reasons I fail to comprehend, Sherlock tolerates your presence, and you continue to permit his. You'll be armed only when risk factors demand extra caution. Greg ignores the subtle dig at his strange working relationship with Holmes the Younger. And you'll be the one determining these factors? Mycroft nods. I realize this almost surely seems excessive to you, he continues after a pause. There are few areas left in my life within which I permit myself strong sentiment. And yet the matter of Sherlock's safety is of paramount concern. I feel very protective of him. I understand the feeling, Greg replies, words muted behind barely moving lips. When the car pulls to a stop at a helipad and he's instructed to board the military chopper that waits there, its rotors already beginning to spin up. Well, he hasn't got the energy left in him for continued disbelief. As it turns out, the helicopter hasn't actually been ordered up just for him. 5 soldiers are already on board, looking silently askance at him as he drags on his suitcase and finds a place to stow it. The very moment Greg's situated with his bulky earphones and harness in place, the pilot lifts them off the ground. It takes Greg a few minutes to get one of the men to talk to him, a big, dark-skinned bloke who introduces himself as Wood. He isn't exactly a thrilling conversation partner. Greg begins to wonder before long whether Wood is a surname or a descriptor. But eventually he divulges that the transport had been briefly diverted from their usual route to take on the unexpected extra passenger. So where are we bound? Wood quirks a brow at him. Combination Research and Field Exercise Base in Dartmoor. They call the lab complex Baskerville. These guys and me are only bound for DFT. Man, are you pulling my leg or something? A civvy hitching a special ride and you don't even know where you're going? He ducks his head and shrugs. I'm just doing what I'm told. Greg isn't sure whether the chosen method of his transport is simply a matter of convenience or a play by Mycroft to make him apprehensive and biddable. Either way, by the time he and Wood and the others are let off at the Baskerville landing area, surrounded by its high fences and patrolling guards, he's imagining the worst for the week ahead. Hard bunks and cold showers and drills from the crack of dawn, and above all, surveillance. That worries him most. Mycroft had said it himself. The Ukrainian smugglers are a clear danger, at least for a day or two yet. So what if Greg were to be caught breathless, pulled into a ripple under the watching eyes of the military and Mycroft's people? At minimum, he can certainly visualize Mycroft ordering him examined. It's little use, after all, to acquire a bodyguard who's got some undiagnosed ailment to hinder his performance. At maximum, well, this is a highly classified research facility, isolated somewhere in the wilds of Devon, teeming with military scientists who'd no doubt love to figure out what could have produced a gift like his. And he's here on pure trust, having left without telling anyone at all where he would be. It's a surprising relief to be met outside the chopper by a skinny, nervous-looking aide in a dark suit, someone clearly accustomed to a desk-bound bureaucratic job. The aide has a compact rental car. He takes Greg directly off the base into a small town with signs proclaiming it Grimpen Village, and escorts him to check in at one of the quaint little inns there. Over a light lunch, his liaison, or Elliot, as Greg's been asked to address him, although it's obvious he's unaccustomed to using an alias, gives him an overview of the week's agenda. It is, in fact, meant to be intensive training, but he's not to be denied creatured comforts. He'll have a ride in and out of the training facilities each day. He'll have one-on-one sessions with a respected instructor, and from supper onwards each evening, his time will be his own. Not that there's all that much to do, Elliot tells him, sounding apologetic. It makes Greg wonder what sort of personage the young man believes him to be. Did his superiors not tell him he was to be babysitting a lowly police detective? It's fine, he smiles. Fresh air, country scenery, and a week of peace and quiet. What more could a man ask? The fresh air is entirely too fresh for his liking, almost disturbingly so. The utter lack of accustomed city odors leaves it feeling ionized and sharp, and it makes Greg's throat ache. The country scenery is invisible after dark when Greg is free to see it, and the moor is dull and bleak in January anyway. And as for peace and quiet, it doesn't take long at all before he's sick to death of it. He hasn't got mobile reception here, of course. On the second night, he places a call from his room, hoping that Nadia will have had time to accept whatever explanation she'd been given. She not only believes it, she scolds Greg quite soundly for failing to schedule his 13-year CID recertification testing before the allotted period had expired. He almost drops the receiver in surprise at hearing the ridiculous story. Edwards must have been very convincing. By the end of that chat, he's got absolutely no qualms about informing her that he likely won't be granted another opportunity to call. That does somewhat reduce his options in terms of evening entertainment, though. On the third night, tired and practically cross-eyed from target practice, he's left with a choice of watching telly sprawled out on the bed or a spell in the pub downstairs. In the end, the desire to be around other people wins out, and he ventures from his room. The Ward's Rest Inn is the smaller of the two in Grimpen Village in terms of sleeping occupancy, but its attached pub is fairly spacious. A handful of apparent locals are playing a game of billiards, and a married couple is chatting near the fire. Greg makes his way to sit at the bar, where a man of perhaps 25 is nursing a drink and staring vaguely in the direction of the news. The young man seems nervous and deeply unhappy, but Greg gets the sense that a little conversation wouldn't go amiss. He orders his pint in a jovial tone and makes sure to direct a friendly, sympathetic smile at his fellow patron as he settles in. Sure enough, within 5 minutes there's a cleared throat and a soft murmur beside him. Ever get the feeling that you're just being used so other people can get what they want? Greg chuckles in surprise as he turns. Reckon I do at that, he answers honestly. This week's been a fine example. A ghost of a smile pulls the man's mouth crooked, and he rubs at his 3-day stubble. He doesn't look as if he's been sleeping well. Oh, good. I was wondering if it's just me. Well, if it'll make you feel better, I've got someone who fancies himself my boss making wholesale decisions about what my job entails and rearranging my life to suit his needs. Shipped me off out here for a week without so much as a by your leave. Even swiped clothes from my own closet to pack for me. And what wouldn't Greg give to figure out how Mycroft had managed that? That's impressive, says the man. Dunno if I can beat that. Smirking, Greg throws up his hand and orders another pint for the both of them. What have you got, then? He sighs as he nods his thanks for the round. They want my permission to make a film, a television documentary, about something that happened when I was a kid. They want me involved. I've sat in meetings about it all day, and I honestly don't know if they've listened to a word I've had to say. Television, eh? From what I hear, those types are all pretty used to getting their way. You're telling me? I don't even know yet if I want the film made, and they're already talking about using my house as a location headquarters and convincing the inns to give the filming crew special rates, saying it'll be good for tourism, as if I even care. By this point, he's trailed off to mumbling morosely into his beer. Your house? So one of these cute little cottages is yours, huh? Actually, I own the mansion house up north of the village, the head of the moor. Oh, well, isn't that grand? Must be a hard life out here, though. All this fresh air and quiet. How do you stand it? I don't, he answers bluntly. Haven't lived there since I have a place in Plymouth. Today was the first time I'd been back in 16 years. Right, okay, says Greg, easing off a bit. He wasn't trying to upset the kid. They sit and drink in silence for a few minutes. Greg's paying more attention to the headline caption scrolling across the pub's small TV screen than to the young man drinking beside him when that man speaks again. I'm sorry, he mutters. I didn't mean to be rude. It's just hard to talk about it. You don't need to. You've clearly spent quite enough time already today talking about it, whatever it was. Name's Greg, by the way. Henry. They shake hands and share a smile, a little stronger than before. So, what kind of job do you have that they've sent you to Grimpen, of all places? Greg grins wider as Henry puts up his hand to buy the next round. I'm with the Met, Detective Inspector, Homicide and Serious Crime. Seeing Henry's confused look, he nods. I know, it makes no sense to me either to have me so far from London for training. But that's what I get for working with two bloody genius arseholes, eh? Sometimes it's easier not to question. They continue to chat for almost another full hour, through that third round and into a fourth, which might possibly be young Henry's fifth or even sixth. Greg is confident that neither of them will have any trouble sleeping once they trip back upstairs to their respective rooms. Stories about crime in London seem to be taking his new acquaintance's mind off his troubles, whatever they are. He's especially intrigued when Greg talks about what it's like working with his genius consultant. So this guy doesn't just solve murders with you? Sometimes people hire him through his website. Missing inheritance, cheating spouses, odd little things like that. Greg answers, idly doodling endless concentric circles on his third cocktail napkin. Though I dare say it takes a special sort to read what he posts there and come away thinking, I'll ask this bloke. It's a lot of weird stuff. Henry tilts his head inquiringly, and his elbow slips along the bar, nearly tipping him off his stool and cueing an amused snicker from Greg. Recovered, and grinning ruefully at his clumsiness, he asks, Weird like what? Still chuckling, Greg begins to carefully print the web address along the curve of his doodled ripples. You'd have to see it to believe it. I can't do it justice. Here, when you're back home in Plymouth, you can amuse yourself. He hands the napkin to Henry, who blinks blurrily at it for a moment before folding it and tucking it into a pocket. Then the subject of their talk shifts again, comparing notes on favorite football clubs, and the subject of Sherlock Holmes is set easily aside. At the end of the night, Greg bids Henry goodbye, wishing him a safe journey in the morning and luck on dealing with his decisions. He returns to his room feeling buoyed by the fine company. Far from the frustrated resignation he'd felt before heading into the pub, now he actually thinks he can make it through the second half of this strange week with his sanity intact. Now, all I need is some good sleep, he thinks, and no hangover. Gotta have sharp eyes tomorrow if I'm to pass muster. He's spent these past few days silently grumbling about the inconvenience and the presumption that he'll do exactly as Mycroft wishes. He's spent enough of his life feeling like a blunt instrument, used at the whim of an inscrutable higher power and tossed aside when not needed, being instructed in no uncertain terms that he's to make himself useful, to carry a gun on command and go where he's told. It hits closer to home than the elder Holmes probably realizes. Henry's conversation starter had inadvertently scratched the surface of a very deep scar, really. But the truth is, Greg's glad of Mycroft's interference, and deep down he knows he'll always be willing to comply. It's nice to know that someone besides Greg is working for the same goal, after all.